He slapped me, dropped the divorce papers, and said, "You're broken, a barren tree pretending to bloom." I walked out with nothing, except 2 heartbeats inside me I didn't even know were there. The moment everything shattered and began again. The quiet hum of the library had always brought Emily Carter comfort. Rows of books, neatly arranged and catalogued, were the only constants in her world that hadn't changed. But lately, even the comfort of printed pages and whispered footsteps couldn't drown out the emptiness settling deep within her. The library in downtown Portland, though familiar, felt colder these days, less like a sanctuary and more like a refuge from a house that no longer felt like home. Emily was 37 years old, with soft features that always carried a touch of curiosity. Her light brown hair, usually tucked behind her ears, had grown longer in recent months, forgotten in the rush of days that passed without meaning. Daniel, her husband of nearly 12 years, had once said her laugh could change the atmosphere of an entire room. But laughter had grown rare between them. Now, silence filled their house like fog, heavy, shapeless, unspoken. They had stopped talking about things that mattered. No fights, no heated discussions. Just silence. It was as if their marriage had faded quietly, without drama, without tragedy, like a story left unread on a forgotten shelf. They had once dreamed of children, of a little cottage near the coast, of Sunday mornings filled with music and coffee. But somewhere between Daniel's career shifts and Emily's quiet loyalty to the library, those dreams were buried beneath practical decisions and tired routines. They had never tried fertility treatments, never scheduled any appointments. The timing had never felt right, or maybe neither had the courage to admit that the window was slowly closing. Emily still tried. She made his favorite meals, asked about his day, suggested weekend getaways that never made it past vague promises. Daniel smiled politely, nodded, sometimes even kissed her cheek before going back to his laptop or leaving early for work. It was not cruelty. It was detachment. The kind that stings not because it is sharp, but because it is quiet. That morning felt no different, until it was. Emily walked into the kitchen, still in her robe, expecting the usual silence and a coffee cup waiting for her. Instead, she found the table cleared, except for an envelope. Her name was written in Daniel's familiar handwriting, neat and composed. She hesitated. Something in the air had shifted. The kind of shift that happens just before a thunderstorm, when the sky is still but your skin knows something is coming. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside were neatly stapled documents. The headline was clear. Petition for dissolution of marriage. There was no letter. Just a small note tucked between the pages. 6 handwritten words, "You deserve what I can't give." Emily sat down. Her hands trembled, but not from rage. The absence of anger confused her. What she felt was something harder to define, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing there's no one behind you. She wasn't crying. Not yet. There was only stillness. A sense of inevitability she hadn't prepared for. For years, she had felt the distance growing, like 2 travelers walking the same road in opposite directions, too polite to admit they were lost. She had hoped the silence was temporary, that love could be remembered, rekindled. But Daniel had chosen clarity. In his quiet way, he had ended what they were both afraid to confront. The kettle on the stove began to whistle, sharp and high-pitched. She turned it off absent-mindedly and looked around the kitchen, white cabinets, the chipped mug she always used, the photo of them from their honeymoon in Italy, now slightly faded in the sun. She stood up, took the photo off the fridge, and held it for a long moment before placing it face down on the counter. No confrontation. No cruel words. Just an envelope and a sentence. She went upstairs, pulled a small suitcase from under the bed, and opened her closet. Folded shirts, a few pairs of jeans, comfortable shoes. She packed mechanically, like someone preparing for a trip with no destination. Her fingers paused over a blue sweater Daniel once complimented, then moved past it. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stay. Before leaving, she sat one last time on the edge of the bed. It still carried his scent, faint but unmistakable, cedarwood and aftershave. She pressed her hand against the comforter and whispered, not to him, but to the silence, was it really too late? Downstairs, she picked up her coat and the envelope. She didn't know why she took it. Maybe proof that it hadn't all been imagined. That even quiet endings leave something behind. As she closed the door behind her, Portland's autumn air greeted her with a chill. Leaves crunched beneath her boots as she stepped off the porch. She looked back only once, just to make sure the house was still there, that it hadn't vanished with the life she was leaving. No destination. No plan. Only the weight of a decision that had been made for both of them. And the quiet certainty that the next chapter had just begun, even if she had no idea how to write it. Emily walked for what felt like hours. The city was familiar, yet strange, as if it belonged to someone else now. Her suitcase rolled unevenly along the cracked sidewalks, its wheels catching in the crevices as if trying to hold her back. But there was no return. Not to that house. Not to the version of herself that had once waited at its door hoping things would fix themselves. She found herself at a small cafe near Hawthorne Boulevard, one she used to visit with Rachel in their university days. It hadn't changed much, mismatched furniture, soft jazz playing in the background, and the same handwritten chalkboard menu offering cinnamon-spiced lattes. Emily stepped inside and ordered tea. She didn't want the comfort of coffee, not today. Something gentler, something that didn't pretend to energize when all she needed was stillness. At a corner table, she pulled the envelope from her bag and placed it in front of her. She hadn't read the documents, not really. She had only seen the title, the signature, the sentence on the note. Now, as steam curled from her cup, she unfolded the papers. The legal jargon blurred before her eyes. Irreconcilable differences. No contest. Division of assets. It all felt surgical, a clean severing of ties, as if 12 years could be categorized and stamped. She turned the note over, hoping for more, a message, an explanation, something. But the back was blank. Her phone buzzed. A message from Rachel, "You okay? Want to talk?" Emily stared at it for a moment, then typed back, "Can I come over?" Rachel's apartment was on the west side of the city, a cozy third-floor space above a bakery. Emily hadn't been there in over a year, but Rachel answered the door as if no time had passed. She pulled Emily into a long, wordless hug. Rachel always knew when words were unnecessary. The silence between them was different, comforting rather than cold. They sat on the couch with hot soup and blankets. Emily recounted only the essentials, the envelope, the note, the suddenness of it all. Rachel listened, nodding, offering no advice. Just presence. That night, Rachel insisted Emily stay. The guest room was small, filled with boxes and an unused treadmill, but Emily didn't care. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the layers of her life peeling away. She expected tears. They didn't come. The next morning, she woke with a strange unease in her stomach. She assumed it was the stress. She skipped breakfast, but nausea followed her throughout the day. Later, while folding laundry with Rachel, she had to sit down suddenly, lightheaded and flushed. "Emily, are you okay?" Rachel asked, concerned. "I'm just tired, I think," Emily replied. Rachel paused, then narrowed her eyes gently. "How late are you?" Emily blinked. "What?" "Your cycle. How late are you?" Emily's heart skipped. She opened her mouth, closed it again. "I don't know. A few weeks, maybe? I haven't been keeping track." Rachel got up and returned with a small calendar and a pen. "Let's count." Emily did. By the third week, her fingers trembled. Rachel was already walking to the bathroom. "I have a test. From a few months ago, when I thought I might. Anyway, it's still good. You should take it." Emily hesitated. The thought hadn't even crossed her mind. She had accepted long ago that it wasn't going to happen, not for them, not for her. and even though she and Daniel hadn't completely stopped trying, the quiet months had become quiet years. But now, with Rachel watching, with her body feeling foreign, Emily nodded. The test sat on the sink while she waited, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, breath shallow. The seconds stretched impossibly. The silence of the room felt louder than any argument, any ending. When she finally looked, the result was clear. No hesitation. No ambiguity. Positive. Emily sat down on the edge of the bathtub, her vision swimming. She heard Rachel outside the door but couldn't speak yet. Her thoughts were too loud. A child. No, 2 children. That thought came uninvited, a fragment of memory from a moment a month ago, when she joked with Daniel about names. It had been one of their rare soft evenings. They had laughed, briefly, over the idea of twins. He had said something about balance, one for each of them. That memory cracked something open. Tears welled up, not from fear, but from the overwhelming contradiction of it all. Daniel had ended their marriage without knowing what had begun inside her. She opened the door, test in hand. Rachel's face fell into softness. "Oh, Emily nodded. "I don't know what to do." "You're going to breathe," Rachel said, wrapping her in an embrace. "And tomorrow, we're going to a doctor. Just to be sure." The appointment was scheduled for the next afternoon. The clinic was warm and quiet, with calming blue walls and soft music. The technician, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, led her to the ultrasound room. Emily lay back, hands folded tightly over her stomach, as the screen flickered into life. The technician moved the wand gently, and after a moment, smiled. "Well," she said softly. "Looks like you're in for double the joy." Emily blinked. "I'm sorry?" "There are 2, the woman said, turning the monitor slightly. "You're having twins." Emily didn't hear the rest of the explanation. The words came in waves, 6 weeks, healthy heartbeats, next steps, but she was somewhere else. Somewhere between shock and wonder. She left the clinic clutching the sonogram image like a secret, her hands trembling. Back at Rachel's apartment, she placed the photo on the kitchen counter. Rachel gasped. "Oh my God. You're really..." "2," Emily said, quietly. "Twins." Rachel covered her mouth, overwhelmed, then laughed, a soft, joyous sound. "The universe doesn't mess around." Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photo. 2 small dots. 2 impossibly tiny beginnings. For a long time, she had believed her life was quietly closing in on itself. But now, with this unexpected revelation, something within her stirred, not fear, not sadness. It was hope. And that night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed in the guest room, her hand resting on her stomach, she whispered to the silence, "I'm not alone anymore." The apartment listing was modest, studio with light, charm, and city views, ideal for someone starting over. Emily had laughed quietly when she read it. She wasn't starting over, not really. She was starting something entirely new, with no map, no compass, and 2 lives growing inside her. But charm sounded nice. Charm was something she hadn't felt in a long time. The building was old, with creaky stairs and faded green carpeting that hadn't seen a good cleaning in years. But the unit itself was sunlit and small in a way that felt manageable. A kitchenette barely separated from the living area, a window that overlooked a tree-lined alley, and a bathroom with tiles the color of antique porcelain. She signed the lease the same afternoon, hands still a little unsteady from the sonogram she carried in her purse. Rachel helped her move. There wasn't much: a suitcase, a few boxes, her laptop, and a lamp shaped like a lighthouse that she had once bought for Daniel and now claimed back without guilt. They spent the first night assembling a cheap but sturdy futon. Rachel made jokes, but Emily was quiet, watching the empty space turn into something resembling shelter. The next morning brought more than sunlight. It brought fatigue. A deep, bone-level tiredness that Emily hadn't expected. She had known pregnancy could be exhausting, but this was something else. Her limbs felt heavy, Her eyes struggled to stay open past noon. Rachel noticed it first. "You need to slow down," she warned gently. "You're building a whole universe in there." Emily agreed but knew she didn't have the luxury of rest. Bills wouldn't pay themselves. Her savings were limited, especially after signing the lease and paying the deposit. She needed income, and she needed it now. She started with what she knew best: books. Libraries weren't hiring, not for anything full-time, but she found a temporary position cataloging for a local historical archive, 3 days a week, 5 hours a day. The pay was modest, but the work was quiet, and no one asked questions when she took longer bathroom breaks or brought a cushion for her lower back. In the evenings, she began writing. Not with purpose, not yet. But sentences came, fragments of thought. She found herself typing letters to her unborn children, long paragraphs she never meant to share. She told them about the library, about the ocean she loved but rarely visited, about the silence that had once scared her and now offered peace. One rainy afternoon, after finishing a shift at the archive, she wandered into a nearby community center. The front desk welcomed her with a flyer: "Support Circle for Expecting Moms, Thursdays at 6. She almost walked away. But something made her stay. The group met in a small room with beanbags, soft rugs, and the smell of chamomile tea. The women were all different: young, older, single, married, some with toddlers in tow. The atmosphere was warm, unjudging. Emily introduced herself simply: "First-time mom. Twins. Alone, for now." They didn't ask for details. Instead, they shared stories about cravings, fears, stretch marks, and midnight hopes. One woman, Tanya, talked about raising her daughter after leaving a job she loved. Another, Celeste, joked about the way her ankles had disappeared and never returned. Emily smiled for the first time in days. When the session ended, she stayed behind to help clean up. The group leader, a retired midwife named Joanne, pulled her aside. "You're doing better than you think," she said. "Even if you don't feel it yet." Emily nodded, unsure whether to believe it, but grateful for the words. Days passed with a rhythm that surprised her. Mornings at the archive. Afternoons napping or reading. Thursdays at the group. Rachel visited on weekends with grocery bags and unsolicited advice about baby names. "You're not naming one of them after a bird, are you? Sparrow? Wren? No offense, but they deserve something fierce." Emily had laughed, then added "Wren" to her mental list anyway, just in case. It was during one of her late-night writing sessions that her phone lit up with a message. The name on the screen made her heart pause. "Daniel. Hi, Emily. I hope you're well. Just wanted to confirm I received the signed documents. Thank you. Wishing you peace and clarity as we move forward." She read the message twice. It was short, respectful, unemotional. It wasn't a door opening. It wasn't an apology. It was a line drawn cleanly, with intention. She didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say, not now. The next day, she sat by the window, sunlight falling across her legs. She pulled the sonogram from her bag and pinned it to the wall above the desk. Below it, she taped a sticky note with a single word: "Begin." That afternoon, while sorting through a box of old notebooks, she found a letter. It had been placed between two photo albums, carefully folded, its envelope bearing her name in her mother's handwriting. Her breath caught. Her mother had passed away the year before, after a long illness. They had been close in the quiet way that mothers and daughters sometimes are: no grand gestures, just shared coffee, weekly calls, and 1,000 unspoken understandings. Emily had forgotten about this letter. Or maybe she had never seen it. She opened it carefully, fingers trembling. "My Emily. I don't know when you'll read this. Maybe it'll be after I'm gone, maybe not. But I want you to know something: your strength doesn't come from noise or confrontation. It comes from how you stay, how you care, how you hope even when everything tells you not to. That's rare. Don't be afraid to choose yourself, even if it feels like you're letting others down. And if you ever find yourself holding a new beginning, whatever form it takes, don't run from it. You were made for beginnings, not endings. I love you always. Mom. Emily pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. She didn't cry. Not this time. The tears were done, at least for now. She felt something else rising in their place, a quiet determination. The apartment, small as it was, began to feel like a home. She pinned her mother's letter beside the sonogram. Then she took a deep breath and made a list on a blank page titled Next. Item 1, buy second-hand cribs. Item 2, call the clinic about prenatal yoga. Item 3, say yes to what comes next, even if it's terrifying. Outside, the city moved on, people hurrying, lights changing, buses sighing against the curb. But inside her apartment, something had shifted. Emily was not waiting anymore. She was beginning. The ultrasound screen flickered once more, and this time, Emily allowed herself to look directly at it. The two shapes were clearer now, still small, still barely more than outlines, but distinct and real. The technician moved the probe gently and spoke in a calm voice about development milestones, heartbeats, and gestational measurements. Emily only half listened. Her eyes were fixed on the grainy image. Later that evening, she sat on the floor of her apartment, knees pulled to her chest, the sonogram placed on the rug in front of her. Around her, opened boxes held small clothes and soft blankets donated by other women from the community group. Someone had given her a stack of baby books, another had dropped off 2 matching knit hats. Most of the items were second-hand, but Emily didn't care. Each item carried something that couldn't be bought: intention. It was raining outside, the kind of steady Portland drizzle that lulled the city into a half-sleep. She reached for her notebook and began writing again, not a letter this time, but something different. I didn't think this would be my story. I didn't plan for it. But maybe that's what makes it worth telling. Not because I knew how to do everything, but because I didn't, and still chose to keep going. She stopped, let the pen rest. In the following weeks, her world shifted into a quiet momentum. Her job at the archive continued, though she requested fewer hours as her body began to demand more rest. She attended a prenatal yoga class at the community center, hesitant at first but quickly discovering how deeply her body needed the slow stretches and focused breathing. Her instructor, a tall, silver-haired woman named Marie, moved through the room with a quiet grace. "You're not just preparing to give birth," she had said during their second class. "You're preparing to become someone entirely new." It was during one of those classes that Emily met Adrienne, a fellow expectant mother also carrying twins. Adrienne was bold where Emily was reserved, and within minutes of conversation, she had invited Emily out for smoothies after class. They became fast friends. Adrienne had already been through a divorce, had a teenage daughter, and was navigating motherhood again in her 40s. She had a dry wit and a laugh that could shake an entire room. "Want to see something terrifying?" Adrienne asked one afternoon, pulling out her phone. She scrolled through photos and then showed Emily a picture of her living room, entirely overtaken by baby gear. "This is what happens when you say yes to every free item on the internet." Emily laughed, something full and true. It was Adrienne who first encouraged Emily to keep writing. After reading a few of the letters Emily had shared in a moment of vulnerability, she said, "You don't realize how rare it is to put this much heart into paper. People need to read this." Emily shrugged. "It's just for me." Maybe it was. But now, it could be for someone else. That idea stayed with her. Not in a loud way, but like a whisper that returned in the quietest moments, as she walked home with groceries, as she folded onesies by the window, as she waited in line at the pharmacy. What if her story wasn't just a personal one? What if it was something that could help someone else? One Friday evening, as she browsed through an online parenting forum, she saw a thread titled, "Letters to My Future Child." It was filled with entries from women around the world, handwritten messages, confessions, dreams. She read through dozens of them, heart swelling at the shared vulnerability. Then, impulsively, she opened a new post and uploaded one of her letters. She signed it simply, Emily, Portland. She closed the laptop and didn't think much of it. But by the next morning, there were replies. Dozens of them. Strangers writing to say her words had reached them, that they felt seen, that someone else understood the quiet fears and fierce hopes of starting again. One comment in particular stayed with her, "Thank you. I read this while rocking my 3-month-old, wondering if I was doing anything right. Your words made me feel like maybe I'm not so alone." Something cracked open in Emily that day, not in a painful way, but like a seed beneath the soil, finally pushing through. She kept writing. Meanwhile, her pregnancy advanced steadily. Her doctor appointments grew more frequent, the list of precautions longer. She bought a large planner and began color-coding everything: meal plans, vitamins, stretch exercises, reading goals. It gave her a sense of order, even if chaos loomed beneath the surface. Then came the day when her name was called at the clinic, but instead of the usual nurse, it was a man in a tan blazer waiting in the hallway. He introduced himself as Professor Rayner, one of her former instructors from university, now working with a local college library on digital preservation. "I saw your name on an alumni forum," he said, smiling warmly. "Your recent writings, they're compelling. Raw, but thoughtful. I'm curating a new project for the university's digital archive and wondered if you'd be interested in contributing, remotely, of course." Emily blinked, unsure how to respond. "You mean, writing?" "Curating," he said. "Digitizing rare works. Commentary. Some editorial work, depending on how your schedule allows. It's flexible. And paid." She agreed without hesitation. It wasn't just about the money, though it would help. It was the idea of returning to a world that once made her feel whole. A world of ideas, words, history. She had missed it more than she realized. Her days took on new meaning. In the mornings, she sorted through historical letters and journals for the digital archive. In the afternoons, she rested or met with Adrian. On Thursdays, the community circle continued. And in the evenings, she wrote, sometimes about motherhood, sometimes about uncertainty, always with honesty. One night, she sat by the open window, her notebook in her lap. The city's lights flickered in the distance. She could feel them, the twins, fluttering inside her like small wings testing the air. She placed both hands on her stomach and whispered, "You're not here yet, but you've already changed everything." She didn't know what the future held. There were still hard days, still moments of doubt. But they no longer defined her. She had not planned for this life, but she was beginning to love it. Spring in Portland arrived quietly, brushing the trees with soft green and waking the sidewalks with bursts of purple flowers. Emily had begun to walk more often, especially in the early hours before the streets filled. The movement helped with the swelling in her ankles, and the air smelled fresher than it had in months. It was the kind of season that made change feel less daunting. Like something could grow where you didn't expect it. Her new schedule settled into a rhythm: remote work for the university's digital project in the morning, then a few hours of rest, followed by writing or short visits with Adrian or Rachel. The pieces she uploaded to the parenting forum had gained a small following, though she hadn't expected it. Once, a woman from Iowa messaged her just to say, "You write the way I think but never say out loud." That message stayed with her, quietly feeding her confidence. Rachel showed up one Saturday with a toolbox and a determined look. "You're not giving birth into chaos," she declared, opening the front door with her elbow while balancing a crate full of tools. "We're assembling those cribs today. Or I'm not leaving." Emily laughed and helped her clear the living room. The boxes containing the disassembled cribs had arrived the previous week, and Emily had avoided opening them. They represented something real, a step beyond theory. But with Rachel there, and her energy infectiously purposeful, she allowed herself to lean into it. It took them over 4 hours and one incorrect assembly attempt that left them both lying on the floor in tears of laughter. Why does everything from this brand require psychic abilities to understand? Rachel groaned, waving the instruction sheet in the air. "They assume we've built one before," Emily said. Rachel glanced at her sideways. Well, we haven't. But we're doing it anyway. By the time they were done, the cribs stood side by side near the sunlit corner of the studio. Emily stood in front of them for a long time after Rachel had left. She ran her hand along the edge of each one, imagining tiny fingers gripping the wooden bars, imagining the sound of breathing from two small sleeping bodies. Later that night, while organizing her closet, she found the old box of letters again, the one she had stumbled on when she first moved in. Most of them were from her mother, but there were a few she didn't recognize. One envelope was addressed in unfamiliar handwriting, with no return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter, written in blue ink, folded twice. Emily, if you're reading this, then I never found the right time to send it. I'm sorry. I don't know how to explain what went wrong between us, maybe we both stopped listening. I just hope that wherever you are, you found something better than what we had. You deserve that. There was no signature. She turned the envelope over again, searching for a clue. Nothing. She folded it back and placed it in a drawer. Some things didn't need closure, just acceptance. The next day, while browsing through a used bookstore, she spotted a book of essays titled Letters We Never Send. Something about the title struck her. She picked it up and flipped through it. The pages were filled with anonymous letters, to ex-lovers, to parents, to unborn children. Some were poetic, others messy and raw. One page read, "Sometimes we write not to be heard, but to listen more closely to ourselves." She bought the book and finished it that same night. When she closed it, an idea was already forming, slow, like fog lifting, but steady. She pulled out her laptop and opened a blank document. Without thinking too much, she typed a title, "Notes to You, Before You Arrive." She didn't tell anyone about it. Not yet. It was hers for now, a quiet project that grew alongside the lives inside her. Every day, she added something, a paragraph, a thought, a letter. It wasn't always joyful. Some entries spoke of fear. Some, of loneliness. But every word was honest. One entry read, "I used to think motherhood would find me when I was ready. But maybe it finds us when we have no choice but to become more than we thought possible." The next week, she received an email from Daniel. It was brief and respectful. He had signed the final papers, confirmed the dissolution, and wished her peace again. There was no mention of the children. Emily stared at the screen, unsure if she should reply. But she didn't feel bitterness. Just a kind of soft release, as though a door she had left half open had now gently closed. She replied only with, "Thank you. Wishing you the same." It was enough. The following weekend, she attended a community event hosted at the local park, part farmers market, part resource fair, with booths for new parents, small local authors, and food vendors. Adrian insisted on going. You need sunshine and at least one hot dog. And maybe something that isn't a to-do list. Emily wandered between booths with a lemonade in hand. A woman selling hand-bound journals struck up a conversation with her. "Are you a writer?" the woman asked. Emily hesitated. "I guess I am." She left with a new notebook and the first sense in months that she was building something that extended beyond the pregnancy, beyond the daily list of things to buy and assemble. That evening, she started drafting a pitch email to an independent blog about parenting and healing through writing. The blog had once published an essay about single mothers that had moved her deeply. She thought her voice might fit there too. It took her 3 days to finish the pitch. She reread it 17 times, deleting and rewriting whole paragraphs. When she finally clicked send, she closed the laptop and forced herself to go for a walk. 2 days later, she received a reply. "We love your voice. We'd like to publish your piece and would be interested in reading more. Let us know if you'd be open to a series." Emily stared at the message, the weight of it settling in. Not fame. Not a book deal. Just one door, opening. She walked into the nursery corner and looked at the cribs again. She reached for the soft yellow blanket draped over one of the rails and pressed it to her cheek. "You've changed everything," she whispered. In the quiet of that evening, she didn't feel like she was surviving anymore. She felt like she was beginning, truly, this time. The early mornings had become Emily's favorite time of day. The city hadn't quite woken up, and her building, usually echoing with neighbors' steps and voices, was still. It was during these moments that her thoughts gathered with the most clarity. She would sit by the window with a blanket over her legs, holding a warm mug of tea, and place one hand on her belly, waiting for the quiet stirrings of the twins. They didn't always move on cue, but when they did, it was enough to steady her. One of those mornings, while rearranging a box of books that had remained untouched since the move, she discovered something wrapped carefully in tissue paper, her mother's old brooch, shaped like a small silver branch with 2 leaves. She had forgotten she packed it. As she unwrapped it, a smaller envelope slid free from underneath the brooch. This one wasn't labeled. It was sealed but not tightly. Emily opened it with care. It was a second letter. "My sweet girl. If you found this, then life must be moving in a way that's both beautiful and uncertain. That's how life tends to work, never offering one without the other. I know that one day, you might face moments when everything feels heavier than it should. And when that day comes, I hope these words remind you of your roots." Emily read the letter slowly, line by line, as if each phrase deserved a full breath of its own. Her mother's words spoke of resilience, not as a trait to master, but as something already within her, something that would stretch and grow the moment it was needed. Don't be afraid of starting small. Don't wait for the fear to pass before you begin. The fear never fully leaves. But your courage, my darling, is louder. Emily sat for a long while, the letter resting in her lap, her other hand gently pressing against the curve of her belly. She whispered the final line of the letter aloud, letting it settle into the quiet room. You don't have to know what's ahead to keep walking. Later that afternoon, she carefully placed the letter inside a frame and hung it above the cribs, just between the two. It felt like a small ceremony, not dramatic, but meaningful. That letter was the one thing she wanted her children to see every day. Not as a quote to memorize, but as a truth to absorb with time. The framed letter quickly became a centerpiece, drawing the attention of every visitor. When Rachel stopped by that weekend with a delivery of bulk diapers, she stood in front of it in silence for several seconds. "She always knew how to say exactly what you needed," she said. "I hope your kids inherit that part of her." "They already have more of her than they know," Emily replied. Adrian came by the following day, bringing with her a box of children's books she had picked up from a closing bookstore. As they sorted through titles and reminisced about ones they remembered from childhood, Emily handed her the letter to read. After finishing it, Adrian handed it back with a nod. "Put that one in your book, Emily. People need that kind of anchor." Emily had been quietly expanding the manuscript she'd begun, a combination of reflections, letters, and essays tied together by the journey she hadn't expected to live. It wasn't just about motherhood anymore. It was about identity, change, and the quiet rebuilding of self after loss. The letter from her mother didn't just fit into the story. It deepened it. One evening, while reviewing the edits for her second blog submission, she received a message from Professor Rayner. "Emily, I'd like to connect you with an editor friend of mine. She runs a small independent press. Your writing deserves to go beyond blog posts." Emily stared at the message for a long time, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. Her first instinct was hesitation. She hadn't written for publication before this year. She was still figuring herself out. But then, she remembered the letter on the wall. "Don't wait for the fear to pass." She replied, "I'd be honored." That same week, she received her first printed check from the Digital Archive project. She deposited it with a sense of disbelief, not because it was large, but because it was earned doing something she once thought had no place in her future. Her old professor's belief in her was slowly becoming something she believed too. With that small financial cushion, she made a list of things she had put off: a better stroller, a second car seat, maternity clothes that actually fit. She added one indulgent item at the end: a glider chair for the nursery. She had seen one during a visit to a friend's home years ago, a deep-cushioned seat that swayed gently without effort. At the time, it seemed like a detail only those fully immersed in motherhood would care about. Now, it symbolized something different: presence. A chair that said, "I'm staying. I'm showing up." The glider arrived in 2 boxes and took Emily over an hour to assemble. When she finally sat in it, the chair moved softly, almost rhythmically. She closed her eyes and imagined late nights with 2 babies, the quiet hum of lullabies, the weight of small bodies against her chest. It didn't feel terrifying. It felt inevitable, like something she had been walking toward, even when she didn't know it. Meanwhile, the support group at the community center had grown. New mothers joined weekly, and one of the volunteers suggested creating a rotating speaker schedule. Emily was asked to open the next session with a reading. She chose to read an entry from her book, one she had written in the early weeks, when the loneliness still felt sharp and the fear louder than her heartbeat. "I didn't believe at first that I could be both broken and becoming," she read. "But maybe they're not opposites. Maybe you can carry the pieces of an old life while shaping a new one, and neither makes you less whole." When she finished, the room was silent. Then a few heads nodded. A woman across from her wiped her eyes. Joanne, the retired midwife who continued to lead the group with grace and firmness, walked over after and took her hand. "Keep writing, Emily. You're giving voice to people who don't know how to find theirs yet." That night, she wrote a letter to her future self, not for the book, not for anyone to read. Just something for her to hold on to in the months to come. You were afraid, and you still said yes. You were uncertain, and you still moved forward. You didn't know how to become a mother, but you chose to love anyway. That choice will carry you. Emily tucked the letter inside the notebook she kept beside her bed. The next morning, as she woke to the soft light pouring into her apartment, she reached for her belly. The twins moved faintly, a reminder that everything was real and near. She stood, stretched, and walked to the nursery. She sat in the glider chair, eyes on the letter framed above the cribs. She whispered, not to the babies, but to herself, "You're not becoming someone else. You're becoming more of who you already were." And it was enough. By late spring, Emily's apartment had transformed into a lived-in sanctuary, marked by quiet preparation and the invisible presence of anticipation. Every drawer in the small nursery corner was filled, every shelf labeled, every item arranged with a kind of reverence only first-time mothers could understand. But Emily, despite the comfort of her well-folded order, knew the real shifts were happening elsewhere, not in furniture or fabric, but in who she was allowing herself to become. Her work with the university archive continued steadily. Professor Rayner remained encouraging, now more of a mentor than a former professor. They spoke weekly, sometimes about literature, sometimes about parenthood. He was a father of 3, all grown now, and often about the deeper threads that connect stories across generations. Their conversations made Emily feel like she belonged again in the intellectual spaces she had long felt pushed out of. One Wednesday afternoon, as she was scanning through a collection of handwritten letters from the early 20th century, she received an unexpected call from Professor Rayner. "There's an opportunity one think you should consider," he said without preamble. "The university is expanding its digital outreach. They're launching a virtual exhibition series focused on untold stories from American women across decades. I recommended you as a co-curator." Emily leaned back in her chair. Co-curator? Remote, flexible, collaborative. You'd help select the material, organize the narrative structure, and write the contextual essays. There's a small stipend, but more than that, it's a real chance to shape something meaningful. You'd be working with faculty, students, and historians. Emily hesitated. Wouldn't they want someone with more credentials? They want someone with your voice. Someone who knows how to speak to the emotional truth behind the text. That's not something you can teach. She accepted after only a few hours of deliberation. It felt right, not as a career resurrection, but as an evolution of what she had already started. Her voice wasn't just being used, it was being trusted. The next few weeks were a blur of research meetings, late-night reading, and slow, intentional writing. Her role in the project gave her purpose beyond the waiting. It reminded her that identity could coexist with motherhood, that the arrival of her children didn't have to replace who she was, but rather, expand it. One afternoon, she visited the university's local extension building to view some of the physical materials that hadn't yet been digitized. The archive room smelled of old paper and dust and possibility. A student assistant helped her sort through collections, and Emily spent the next 2 hours immersed in letters from women who had lived through wars, migrations, revolutions of the home and heart. She made careful notes, imagining the shape of the exhibition as it might unfold. As she packed her notes into her bag and walked out into the hallway, someone called her name. Emily Carter? She turned and saw a man standing near the bulletin board. He was in his late 30s, tall, dressed in jeans and a light jacket, with a quiet expression that seemed to search her face before fully smiling. It's Noah. Noah Langston. We were in that creative nonfiction seminar together. Professor Wilkes? Emily blinked. The name sparked a memory, pages of workshop drafts, early morning classes, coffee cups with hand-scribbled notes. Noah, she said, the name settling into place. Wow. It's been, what, 15 years? Closer to 20, I think, he replied, stepping closer, his hands in his pockets. You still writing? She smiled. Now and then. Actually, yes. More than I used to. They talked for a few minutes, catching up in the easy way of people who had once been acquaintances with potential, never fully explored. He was back in Portland temporarily, taking care of his father, who was recovering from surgery. I saw your name on the volunteer contributor list for the exhibition, he said. Figured it had to be the same Emily Carter. I didn't expect to literally run into you. They exchanged contact information, and when they parted, there was no promise, no plan, just a shared sense of something unexpectedly pleasant. Later that evening, she thought about their meeting. It didn't carry the weight of a storybook encounter. It was simple, unforced. And yet, it stirred something in her, not romance, not quite, but a quiet recognition that life had many paths, and not all of them needed to be walked alone forever. That weekend, the community center hosted a neighborhood event, a modest fair with local vendors, food stalls, and music from a student jazz ensemble. Emily was invited to set up a small table alongside other writers, artists, and creators from the parenting circle. Rachel came early to help, bringing with her a printed banner that read, "Words from the Quiet Places." On the table, Emily displayed a few printed versions of her essays, some handwritten letters, and a small sign offering free printed excerpts from her upcoming book draft. She didn't expect much. But throughout the afternoon, people stopped by, asked questions, read her work in silence, and thanked her. One woman in her 50s picked up a printed page and said, "This sounds like what I wish I had read when I was younger. When I felt like I had to figure everything out alone." Emily replied simply, "I wrote it because I felt the same way." Before the event ended, she saw Noah again. He walked slowly among the stalls, pausing when he reached hers. "I didn't know you were publishing," he said. "It's early," she replied. "But something's starting." He picked up one of the essays, read a few lines, then said, "It's good. You've always had that clarity in your tone, like you're not trying to impress, just trying to understand." She thanked him. There was no invitation to coffee, no extended conversation. Just a long glance, a kind one, as he folded the paper and placed it in his coat pocket before walking away. When she returned home that evening, her back ached from standing, and her feet throbbed. But she felt something different too, a kind of groundedness. The baby kicks came in waves as she lay back on the glider chair, smiling as the quiet movement filled her from within. She opened her notebook and wrote a single line at the top of a fresh page. "This season isn't about arrival, it's about rediscovery." Then she began another letter. Not to the twins this time, but to herself. The following week brought a shift in the air. The light stretched longer into the evenings, and Emily noticed how the trees outside her apartment had thickened with green, casting new shadows onto her balcony floor. With each passing day, the weight of her body grew more demanding. Movement slowed, tasks took longer, and the simple act of putting on shoes became a small negotiation with gravity. But inside, a quiet anticipation had begun to settle. The kind of anticipation that didn't come with fear or tension, only the slow, deep breath of a life preparing for something it could not yet see. On a Thursday afternoon, Joanne from the community center called with a gentle invitation. There was a small gathering planned for Saturday, nothing formal, just an outdoor picnic for members of the parenting circle, a way to mark the change of seasons before summer came in full. Emily agreed to come, though part of her hesitated. Her energy had been inconsistent, and the thought of socializing for hours felt uncertain. Still, the idea of being among familiar faces outweighed her reservations. The park was quiet when she arrived, the smell of freshly mowed grass drifting through the air. A few folding tables had been set up under the trees, each decorated with simple linens and baskets of fruit and sandwiches. Children ran in the distance while a few parents laid out blankets nearby. Emily walked slowly, one hand on her lower back, and was immediately greeted by Adrian, who handed her a glass of iced tea and guided her toward the shade. They sat for a while, watching the group expand as more people arrived. Emily was in the middle of telling a story about her latest submission to the university's exhibition project when she felt someone step into her peripheral vision. "Emily Carter," came a voice, careful and low. She turned and looked up. It was Noah. This time, he wasn't dressed in academic layers or city tones. He wore a simple shirt, jeans, and a look that carried both recognition and a small touch of uncertainty. She smiled, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. "My niece is part of the center's art program," he replied, motioning toward a nearby picnic table where a small girl was painting with a group of kids. "Her mom couldn't make it today, so I offered to bring her." Emily gestured to the spot beside her, and he sat down carefully, the grass creaking under the shift in weight. They talked for a while, surrounded by the light noise of the picnic, paper plates rustling, children laughing, someone tuning a guitar not far off. The conversation meandered from old memories of college classes to the strange paths their lives had taken since. There was no rush in the way they spoke. It felt like two people building a bridge, not leaping across one. Noah asked about her work, and she spoke about the digital archive, the blog series, and the slow progress of her book. She hesitated only briefly before mentioning the twins, though he had already noticed her pregnancy, the fullness of her figure, the way she shifted slightly to ease pressure from her lower back. "And you?" she asked. "What brought you back here, aside from your niece?" He looked out over the park, where the late afternoon sun glinted off the swings. "My father had a minor stroke 3 months ago. He's recovering well, but it's been a slow road. I moved back to help. I didn't plan to stay this long, but, being here again, it makes you think differently." "Slower." Emily nodded. "Slower isn't bad." He looked at her, really looked this time. "No. It's not." They sat like that for a while, in a quiet that didn't press against the moment. Eventually, his niece came running toward him, a paper crown askew on her head and paint on her cheeks. He stood and took her hand. "I'm glad I ran into you again," he said, and Emily smiled. "Me too." She watched them walk away, the image of a man with a child's hand in his dissolving gently into the gold of the evening light. Something inside her didn't stir with hope or longing, not yet. It stirred with permission. Permission to wonder what might still grow in a life not finished rearranging itself. The next day brought heavy rain, the kind that Portland welcomed in strange intervals even during the warmer months. Emily spent most of it indoors, working through revisions for the exhibition project and reorganizing her manuscript. The memory of the picnic, and of Noah's quiet presence, lingered more than she expected. She found herself replaying pieces of the conversation, trying to decipher if anything had been implied or simply felt. The following week, she received an email from the independent blog she had contributed to. The editor wrote that a few small publishers had reached out with interest in her work and that one in particular, a women-led press focused on storytelling and motherhood, wanted to speak with her directly. They were curious about her manuscript and the possibility of developing it into a full-length book. Emily reread the message several times. The letter framed above the crib seemed to glance down at her like a quiet witness. "Don't wait for the fear to pass." She replied with a yes. The virtual meeting was set for the following Tuesday. In preparation, she printed a few pages of her most resonant essays, annotated them, and even rehearsed how she might speak about her process. But when the meeting happened, it turned out less like a pitch and more like a conversation. The editor, a warm-voiced woman named Clara, didn't ask for numbers or strategy. She asked Emily why she started writing. Emily paused and said, "Because I didn't know how else to hold the things that were changing me." Clara nodded. "That's exactly the kind of truth we look for." By the end of the call, they had agreed on a development timeline and a soft plan to publish within the next year. Emily closed her laptop and sat still for several minutes. The baby shifted inside her as if responding to the change. This wasn't the life she thought she was walking toward when she left that envelope on the kitchen table all those months ago. It wasn't the life she had designed, it was the one she had allowed to take shape. Later that evening, she went out for a slow walk around her neighborhood. As she passed the corner bookstore, she noticed a handwritten sign in the window, "Open Mic Night, Friday, theme, Roots and Reunions." She stopped and stared at it. Then reached for her phone and typed a message to Rachel, "Would you come with me to something Friday night?" Rachel's reply came quickly, "Always." That night, Emily printed a short piece from her manuscript, a section about beginnings, but not the kind that start with fanfare. The kind that begin on park benches, over shared silence, or in moments when you look at someone and see not just who they were, but who you are now, and still feel safe enough to say, "I remember you." Friday evening arrived with a subtle golden light casting warmth across the sidewalks. Emily stood in front of the bookstore's modest stage, her hands curled loosely around a printed sheet of paper. The back room had been rearranged for the open mic night, folding chairs in neat rows, a few tables pushed to the side, string lights hanging like soft punctuation above the heads of the attendees. It smelled faintly of paper and lavender, like something fragile being preserved. Rachel sat in the front row, arms crossed proudly, a smile already fixed to her face. A few of the women from the parenting circle had come too, settling in with cups of herbal tea and offering quiet waves as Emily glanced around nervously. She hadn't read aloud in front of a crowd since university. And then, she hadn't been carrying two lives inside her, or wondering if every heartbeat was setting a rhythm for a future she still couldn't entirely imagine. When her name was called, she stepped up to the microphone with measured breaths. The small podium felt unnecessary, so she set her pages down carefully on the stool beside her and spoke from memory instead. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. "I used to think new beginnings came with clarity. That you'd feel something shift, something bold, maybe even loud. But the truth is, they often arrive like a whisper. Like a moment you don't even realize changed you until you're standing in a room like this, remembering who you were before." She read for just under 5 minutes, a single letter from her manuscript, addressed to her future children, written in the early stages of her pregnancy when she still questioned everything. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment, then filled with soft, sincere applause. She saw Rachel wipe a hand under her eye and smile harder, and that alone was enough to steady Emily's heart. Afterward, several attendees approached to thank her. One older woman said, "Your words made me think about the daughter I never got to know. Thank you for giving me a piece of that tenderness." As the room emptied, Emily and Rachel stepped out into the cooler night. They walked slowly, letting the quiet speak between them. "You were brilliant," Rachel finally said. "I was nervous," Emily replied, half laughing. "But it didn't show." At home that night, the twins kicked gently as if in approval, and Emily wrote in her journal, "Today I read my heart out loud. And someone else heard it. That's enough." The days that followed brought a renewed sense of connection. Her manuscript progressed with more fluidity, and the collaboration with the independent press gained traction. Clara, the editor, invited Emily to participate in an online roundtable with 2 other writers for a summer feature on stories of transformation. Emily hesitated. She wasn't sure if she belonged among more experienced voices, but again, she reminded herself of her mother's words, don't wait for the fear to pass. Meanwhile, the community around her continued to grow. At the prenatal support circle, one of the younger mothers, Marisol, gave birth and returned 2 weeks later with her newborn in a wrap across her chest. Seeing the baby sparked something new in Emily, not panic, but awe. A tangible reminder of what was coming. Her name is Alma, Marisol said softly. It means soul. Because that's what she gave back to me. Later that afternoon, Emily began organizing a small baby shower for herself, not a lavish one, not filled with themes and elaborate games, but a simple gathering with the women who had held space for her through every quiet evolution. Rachel insisted on helping and coordinated with Adrian, who had somehow convinced her teenage daughter to bake cupcakes. The gathering took place at the community center on a cloudy Sunday, where folding chairs and pastel tablecloths softened the industrial edges of the room. There was laughter, shared stories, a stack of hand-me-downs wrapped in brown paper, and music humming gently in the background. Emily sat at the center, not as the guest of honor, but as someone fully present in her own story. Noah arrived midway through, carrying a small potted plant wrapped in cloth, rosemary and mint. He offered it to her without ceremony. "For your windowsill," he said. "So it always smells like something's growing." She smiled, touched. "Thank you. That's perfect." He didn't linger, just stayed for a few minutes, joining in a conversation with a group near the refreshment table before leaving quietly. But the gesture stayed with her. The plant found its place beside her favorite tea mug the next morning. That week, Emily attended her 32nd week prenatal appointment. The twins were strong, growing well, and their movements had become more coordinated. She could tell one from the other now, one more active in the mornings, the other late at night. Her doctor remarked on how steady her health had remained and gently reminded her that delivery could come early with twins. Back at home, she packed a hospital bag, labeled everything, and printed copies of her birth plan. It wasn't detailed, just a few essentials, and a short paragraph about how she wanted the experience to feel safe, supported, and quiet if possible. Later that evening, as she folded the last of the baby clothes, she found herself holding a tiny onesie that Rachel had embroidered with the words, "You are already loved." She traced the letters with her thumb and sat back, overwhelmed not with fear, but with gratitude. She had done it, not perfectly, not with certainty, but with heart. She sent Clara the final draft of her manuscript the next morning with a note, "Here is the story I lived to find. Thank you for helping me believe it mattered." The reply came within an hour, "It more than matters. It's the kind of story people hold on to. Let's get it ready for the world." And so, Emily began preparations not just for motherhood, but for authorship, for the kind of dual birth that leaves a person never quite the same. One of her final journal entries that week read, "There is no line between who I was and who I'm becoming. Only a widening path." The rosemary bloomed. The crib stood ready. The nursery, bathed in late afternoon light, no longer felt like a corner in a small apartment. It felt like the beginning of a world. The official email arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. Emily had just returned from a walk, shorter now, due to the increasing weight of her body, and sat with her feet up, a mug of peppermint tea cradled against her belly. Her laptop was open to her inbox, mostly filled with manuscript comments and publishing updates. But then she saw the subject line, "Publication and Speaking Opportunity, Mother Roots Press." She opened it slowly, heart already thudding. Clara's message was brief, to the point, but warm. The press was hosting a launch event for their upcoming anthology of maternal voices, and they wanted Emily to speak, not just as one of the contributors, but as a featured author. Her manuscript, Notes to You, Before You Arrive, had been chosen for special release alongside the anthology. A modest print run, a reading segment, and a Q&A session were planned. The event would be held in 3 weeks. Just shy of her due date. She reread the message 3 times, both thrilled and stunned. She wasn't a public speaker. She had read once at the bookstore, and yes, people had clapped, but this felt different. This wasn't a supportive local crowd. It was a literary audience. Editors. Critics. Strangers. She called Rachel first. "You're doing it," Rachel said, without hesitation. "End of story. We'll make it work. I'll bring extra pillows. I'll drive you myself." "But what if I go into labor during the reading?" Emily half joked. "Then it'll be the most unforgettable book launch in history." Adrienne's reaction was equally enthusiastic. "Emily, this is the beginning of something. Not just your book. You. People are going to remember your name. And your story will remind them they're not alone." Despite the reassurances, Emily still sat with uncertainty for 2 days before replying. She eventually typed a simple sentence: "Would be honored to participate. Thank you for believing in this work." As the event approached, the preparations began. Clara worked with her to select a short excerpt from the manuscript to read, something clear, personal, and emotionally grounded. Emily chose a passage from the midpoint of the book, when the twins were no longer just an idea, but real, present beings whose movements shaped her days and nights. The days leading to the event moved in an odd rhythm. Her body was slowing, but her schedule was not. Between doctor appointments, manuscript proofreading, and event planning, she found herself living between lists and rest. She delegated where she could. The press handled logistics. Rachel and Adrienne helped with errands. Even Noah stepped in one afternoon to pick up printed bookmarks from a local shop when Emily couldn't manage the walk. "I owe you," she said, when he delivered them with a brown paper bag of lemon muffins. "You owe no one," he replied. "We all show up for each other when we can." There was something in his tone that made her pause. Not just the kindness, but the lack of expectation behind it. He didn't linger, but when he left, she found herself watching the door longer than necessary. On the night before the event, Emily stood in front of the mirror in a soft navy dress that Rachel had insisted she borrow. It stretched gently around her belly and made her feel, for once, not swollen or tired, but present. Whole. She placed her hands on her stomach and whispered, "We're doing this together." The launch took place in a small literary venue in the Pearl District, exposed brick, tall windows, and a row of simple chairs facing a low platform. Emily arrived early, accompanied by Rachel, Adrienne, and a small bag packed just in case. The press team greeted her warmly, ushering her toward a green room where she could sit and breathe before the event began. When she took the stage, the lights weren't too bright. She could still see the faces of the audience, attentive, kind, curious. She introduced herself, thanked the press, and then began to read. The silence in the room wasn't heavy. It was focused. "My children, you are not born yet, but I have already met you 1,000 times in my dreams. I've met you in the quiet moments of doubt, in the scent of chamomile tea, in the way light falls through my kitchen window at dusk. I don't know who you'll become, but I know this: you saved me. Not by arriving, but by giving me a reason to stay." Her voice didn't tremble. Her hands didn't shake. When she finished, the applause came slowly, then built into something that felt more than polite. It felt like recognition. She stepped off the stage and returned to her seat, breathless, not from exertion, but from the strange high of being heard in such a complete way. During the Q&A, one woman asked, "What would you say to someone who's still in the middle of the silence, before the clarity, before the babies, before the book?" Emily paused before answering. "I would tell them that silence isn't the absence of a life. It's the space where a new one begins to form. And that even when you feel invisible, your story is unfolding." After the event, she signed copies of her manuscript, simple chapbook versions printed for the launch. Each signature felt surreal. She wasn't famous. She wasn't a best-selling author. But people stood in front of her with real gratitude. That was enough. When the night ended, Rachel drove her home. The city lights flickered gently through the windshield as they rode in silence for a while. "You were made for this," Rachel said at last. Emily smiled, placing her hand over the swell of her belly. "All of this feels like a gift I almost didn't know I needed." She went to bed that night exhausted, but not from stress. From fullness. She dreamed of 2 voices calling her name, not with words, but with laughter. and she woke with a sense that something big was near. After the launch event, Emily's world shifted again, subtly but unmistakably. The modest success of her book and the warmth of the reception opened doors she had never imagined would swing so easily for her. Invitations came in to speak at local libraries, community centers, and small literary festivals. She found herself fielding emails from women across the country, many of whom shared stories that echoed her own, quiet struggles, whispered fears, and the unexpected strength of becoming a mother alone. Emily was careful not to let the growing attention overwhelm her. Her days were still filled with prenatal appointments, work on the digital archive project, and the final touches on the full manuscript. But in the pockets of free time, she replied to messages and prepared for talks, always mindful to stay grounded in the reasons she had begun writing in the first place. One afternoon, she was invited to appear on a local public television program focused on community voices. The host was warm and gentle, making the small studio feel less like a set and more like a living room. Emily read an excerpt from her book and spoke candidly about the unexpected journey that had brought her here, the silence before the twins, the rediscovery of self, the healing power of words. The interview aired during a mid-afternoon slot, but by the next morning, Emily's inbox was flooded. Messages came from strangers and friends alike. Some were simply expressions of gratitude, others shared stories of similar journeys, or offered advice and encouragement. A few younger women confessed they had hesitated to become mothers, but her story had given them courage to move forward. One message stood out, from a woman named Claire, who wrote, "Your words found me at a moment I thought I'd lost myself. Thank you for reminding me that we carry more strength than we know." Emily kept that message bookmarked, returning to it whenever doubt crept in. Meanwhile, her body continued to change in ways both beautiful and challenging. The twins' movements were strong now, sometimes they kicked in tandem, a reminder of their connection. The nursery was fully prepared, the cribs dressed with soft blankets and tiny mobiles. She found herself humming lullabies she had learned as a child, her voice wavering at first but growing steadier with time. Rachel visited often, bringing meals and humor, while Adrian kept her company with stories of motherhood's highs and lows. Noah checked in regularly, his visits more frequent as the due date approached. Their conversations grew deeper, sharing hopes and uncertainties alike. One evening, after a quiet dinner at Emily's apartment, Noah said, "You know, I didn't expect to find so much life waiting here. You've created something really special." Emily smiled, feeling warmth spread through her. "It feels like I'm just starting to understand what that means." The days moved closer to the end of her pregnancy with a mix of excitement and nerves. Emily often sat in the glider chair, notebook in lap, drafting letters she hoped to share with her children one day. These were not just about motherhood but about resilience, love, and the courage to begin again even when the path is uncertain. Then, one morning, her phone rang early. It was the hospital. "We're calling to let you know that your water has broken," the nurse said. "We're ready for you whenever you are." Emily felt a wave of calm wash over her. This was the moment she had imagined countless times, not with fear, but with a strange sense of completion. Rachel arrived within minutes, packing the last-minute bag and driving her through the waking streets of Portland, the city slowly stirring to life. At the hospital, the process was steady and quiet. Nurses and doctors spoke softly, their care a gentle backdrop to the primal rhythms of birth. Emily held on to every breath, every contraction, her thoughts circling the letter her mother had written, the one about roots and courage. Hours later, she held them both for the first time. Lily and Ben, two small hearts beating against her chest, tiny fingers curling around hers. Tears came freely, a release of months of waiting, wondering, and finally, becoming. Rachel and Noah were waiting just outside the delivery room. Their smiles were bright, eyes shimmering with tears of their own. Emily felt the world shift once more, not just because of the babies, but because she had crossed into a new chapter she had written herself. That night, as she lay in the hospital bed with Lily and Ben nestled against her, she whispered softly, "You saved me. And now, I'm here for you." The hospital room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the faint rustle of linens. Emily lay back against the pillows, her arms cradling the tiny forms of Lily and Ben, who were wrapped snugly in pastel blankets. The twins' breathing was slow and steady, a peaceful rhythm that settled over her like a balm. Hours earlier, the labor had unfolded in a way that felt both gentle and powerful. The pains had come in waves, steady but not overwhelming, and Emily had breathed through them with a focus that surprised even herself. The doctors and nurses had been kind and patient, guiding her with quiet expertise. Rachel had stayed at her side, offering words of encouragement and holding her hand when the contractions peaked. Noah had arrived in the late afternoon, his presence calm and steady, as though he understood that some moments required silence more than conversation. Now, as she looked down at her newborns, the tiny fingers and toes that seemed impossibly fragile yet so full of life, Emily felt a tide of emotions welling inside her. There was awe, love, relief, and a quiet joy she hadn't thought possible. The hours in the hospital passed slowly. Visitors came in shifts, the parenting group sending flowers and cards, Adrian bringing warm soup and stories from home. Rachel stayed until late, holding Emily's hand and sharing memories of the journey that had brought them here. Noah stopped by briefly, handing over a small basket of gifts and a note written in careful handwriting. "Welcome to the world, Lily and Ben," the note read. "May you always know love, resilience, and the courage to find your own paths." Emily folded the note carefully and placed it in her bedside drawer. The words felt like a promise. The first night with the twins was both tender and exhausting. Emily learned quickly the rhythms of feeding, soothing, and changing. There was little sleep, but every moment was a discovery, a new reason to keep going, to stay present. In the days that followed, she settled into a new kind of routine. The apartment, once quiet and organized, now filled with the soft sounds of coos and gentle crying. Rachel helped with errands and meals, Adrian brought over handmade blankets and fresh bread, and Noah checked in regularly, always respectful of space but undeniably present. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the windows, Emily sat in the glider chair, rocking Lily gently in her arms while Ben slept beside her in a bassinet. She pulled out her notebook, the one she had written in for months, and began to write a letter, this one addressed to her children together, not just as unborn hopes but as real, breathing beings. "My dear Lily and Ben," she wrote, "you arrived not just as my children, but as my teachers. You taught me about strength I never knew I had, about love that stretches beyond all fears, and about the grace found in new beginnings. You are my roots and my wings." The days passed, and Emily's manuscript moved closer to completion. Clara, the editor, sent encouraging messages, praising the evolution of the work and the way the personal had become universal. Emily found herself both humbled and energized by the impact her story was beginning to have. One evening, as the twins slept side by side, Emily stood by the window and looked out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. The journey that had once seemed impossible, leaving her old life behind, embracing the unknown, now felt like a path she had walked with courage and love. She thought about the letter from her mother, framed above the cribs, the words that had guided her through the darkest moments: "Don't be afraid to choose yourself, even if it feels like you're letting others down." Emily smiled softly. She had chosen herself, and in doing so, had created a family, a home, and a new story. As she turned away from the window, Lily stirred in her arms, and Ben let out a soft sigh. The night was theirs, filled with the quiet promise of dreams yet to be lived. She whispered once more, "Welcome home." Months had passed since Emily first held Lily and Ben in her arms. The small apartment had transformed into a vibrant home, filled with soft colors, gentle laughter, and the rhythmic sounds of two growing children. Walls that once echoed quiet loneliness now hummed with the melodies of lullabies and play. Every corner bore the marks of love, tiny footprints on the hardwood floor, crayon sketches taped to the fridge, and a scattering of toys that seemed to multiply overnight. Emily sat at her writing desk one afternoon, a steaming cup of chamomile tea beside her. Her notebook lay open, the pen poised above the page. The words she was crafting were not just for her children, but for anyone who had ever found themselves waiting for a new season in life. She wrote, "Some flowers don't bloom in spring. They wait, quietly, beneath the soil, until the moment is just right. And when they do, no one can ignore their brilliance." Her manuscript was nearly complete. Clara, the editor, had sent back notes filled with praise and suggestions, but Emily felt ready. Not just to share her story with the world, but to embrace the fullness of who she had become, a mother, a writer, and a woman who had found strength in unexpected places. The book launch was scheduled for a warm Saturday afternoon at a local bookstore that had become a community hub for parents and artists. Rachel and Adrian arrived early to help set up, bringing homemade treats and decorations. Noah came too, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers tied with a soft ribbon. His presence was steady, familiar, a quiet reassurance in the midst of celebration. The event was intimate, filled with familiar faces and new friends. Emily read a passage that spoke of growth, of the journey from silence to voice, from loss to love. Afterward, she signed copies of her book, each inscription a small connection, a shared acknowledgement of courage. As the afternoon waned, Emily stepped outside into the fading light. The city buzzed softly around her, but in that moment, she felt a profound stillness. She thought back to the years before, the empty rooms, the unopened letters, the quiet decisions that had shaped her path. She thought of her mother's words, the letters that had carried her through the darkest nights. And she smiled. Her children slept peacefully upstairs, unaware of the world's complexities but embodying its greatest hope. Emily knew the journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and exhaustion. But she also knew that she no longer walked alone. With roots deep and wings wide, she was ready to face whatever came next. She closed her notebook and whispered, "We have blossomed, at last." And in that quiet evening, beneath the soft glow of the city lights, Emily Carter's story was no longer one of silence, but of a voice rising, steady, clear, and unstoppable.